What you're about to hear is the story of a man who had everything money could buy, lost it all in the most devastating way possible, and discovered that his greatest failure became his most valuable teacher. This is the story of Marcus Thompson, a tech entrepreneur who built a $50 million empire only to watch it crumble in 24 hours due to a single catastrophic decision. But what happened next will challenge everything you think you know about success, failure, and what truly matters in life. Marcus Thompson stood in his corner office on the 42nd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, looking down at the city that had made him a multimillionaire. It was March 15th, and in less than 24 hours, everything he had built over 15 years would be gone. His tech company, Tech Solutions, employed over 300 people and had just been valued at $50 million. The irony was crushing. He had started this company to escape poverty, and now his own greed was about to drag him right back into it. The morning had started like any other. Marcus arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, his custom Italian suit perfectly pressed, his confidence unshakable. He had built his reputation on taking calculated risks that others were too afraid to take. But this time, the risk he was about to take wasn't calculated at all. It was pure desperation, disguised as ambition. The call came at 9:30 a.m. His accountant, David Chen, delivered news that would haunt Marcus for years to come. The company was being investigated for financial irregularities that Marcus thought he had covered perfectly. In his panic, Marcus made the decision that would destroy everything he had worked for. He decided to liquidate everything and disappear rather than face the consequences of his actions. By the end of that day, Marcus had transferred all company assets to offshore accounts, leaving employees without jobs, investors without returns, and his family without any explanation. He thought he was being smart. He had no idea he was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. To understand how Marcus made such a devastating decision, we need to go back to where it all began. Marcus grew up in Detroit during the economic collapse of the 80s. His father, Robert Thompson, worked at the Ford assembly line until the plant closed when Marcus was 12. His mother, Sarah, cleaned office buildings at night to keep food on the table. The Thompson family lived in a small apartment where the heating rarely worked in winter. Marcus wore the same 3 shirts to school, rotating them throughout the week. He watched his parents argue about money every single night, their voices carrying through the thin walls of their cramped home. His father would drink cheap beer and complain about the system being rigged against people like them. His mother would cry silently while counting coins to see if they could afford milk for the week. Young Marcus made a promise to himself during those cold Detroit nights. He would never be poor again. He would do whatever it took to have money, power, and respect. What he didn't realize was that this childhood trauma was planting seeds of destruction that would bloom decades later. At 13, Marcus started his first business selling stolen car parts with older kids from his neighborhood. He told himself he was just being resourceful, but deep down he was learning that rules were for people who couldn't afford to break them. This mentality would follow him into adulthood, growing stronger with every success until it finally consumed him. What do you think about Marcus's childhood? Do you believe our early experiences shape who we become as adults? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's continue with this incredible journey. At 19, Marcus enrolled in community college while working nights at a computer repair shop in downtown Detroit. This was 1995, and personal computers were becoming mainstream, but most people had no idea how to fix them when they broke. Marcus saw an opportunity that would change his life forever. He started offering house calls for computer repairs, charging $50 per visit when competitors charged twice that amount. His secret wasn't lower prices. It was his ability to explain technical problems in simple terms that made customers feel smart instead of stupid. Within 6 months, he had more clients than he could handle. Marcus dropped out of college and invested every penny he had saved into Thompson Tech Services. He rented a small storefront and hired 2 employees. The business grew rapidly because Marcus had learned something his competitors hadn't. People don't just buy products or services, they buy feelings. They want to feel understood, respected, and intelligent. Marcus made every customer feel like the smartest person in the room. By age 25, Marcus had 7 employees and was pulling in over $200,000 annually. He bought his first BMW, moved into a downtown loft, and started wearing expensive suits. But success brought new problems. The more money he made, the more he wanted. The more respect he gained, the more he craved. The childhood promise he had made to himself was becoming an obsession that would eventually destroy him. Thank you so much for staying with us this far into Marcus's story. I can promise you that what's coming next will shock you even more than what you've already heard. The best is yet to come. In 2003, Marcus met Elena Rodriguez at a tech conference in Chicago. Elena was a marketing executive for a pharmaceutical company, intelligent, beautiful, and from a wealthy family that had never known the kind of poverty Marcus grew up with. She represented everything he thought he wanted: sophistication, status, and access to a world he had always been excluded from. Their courtship was a whirlwind of expensive restaurants, weekend trips to Napa Valley, and Marcus showing off his growing wealth at every opportunity. Elena was impressed by his success story, the classic American dream of rising from poverty to prosperity through hard work and determination. What she didn't know was that Marcus was already hiding financial secrets that would poison their marriage from the very beginning. Marcus had started taking unnecessary business risks to maintain his lavish lifestyle. He was borrowing against future earnings, taking loans using company assets as collateral, and manipulating financial statements to look more profitable than they actually were. He justified these actions by telling himself he was investing in their future together. They married in 2004 in a ceremony that cost more than most people's annual salary. Elena's family was impressed by Marcus's success, and Marcus felt like he had finally proven he belonged in their world. But the pressure to maintain this image was eating him alive. Every month, he had to perform financial miracles to keep up appearances. Elena wanted children, a bigger house, exotic vacations, and all the trappings of wealth she had grown up with. Marcus said yes to everything, even when he couldn't afford it. He opened credit lines, took out personal loans, and started using company funds for personal expenses. Each financial decision pushed him deeper into a hole he didn't know how to escape. The worst part was that Elena genuinely loved him. But Marcus was so consumed with maintaining his image that he couldn't see it. He was falling in love with someone who was falling in love with a lie. Marcus's best friend since childhood was James Mitchell, a quiet kid who had also grown up poor in Detroit, but had chosen a different path. While Marcus chased wealth, James became a social worker helping troubled youth. When Marcus's business started expanding rapidly, he convinced James to leave social work and become his business partner. James was reluctant at first. He had seen how money changed people, and he was worried about what success might do to their friendship. But Marcus was persuasive, promising that they would use their wealth to help their old neighborhood and give back to the community that raised them. James believed in Marcus's vision and joined the company as Chief Operations Officer. For 3 years, their partnership was everything Marcus had promised. James brought integrity and genuine care for employees that balanced Marcus's ruthless ambition. Together, they grew Innovatech Solutions from a small repair shop into a major tech consulting firm. James trusted Marcus completely, never questioning financial decisions or asking to see detailed books. But in 2010, James started noticing irregularities. Employees complained about delayed paychecks. Vendors called asking about overdue payments. When James asked Marcus about these issues, Marcus always had explanations that sounded reasonable. The economy was affecting everyone. Clients were paying late. Cash flow was temporary. James wanted to believe his best friend. The truth was that Marcus had been embezzling company funds to support his increasingly expensive lifestyle. He had mortgaged company property without James's knowledge, taken out loans using James's signature that James never signed, and was using new investment money to pay old debts in a classic Ponzi scheme structure. When James finally demanded to see the real financial statements, Marcus panicked. Instead of confessing, he chose to betray the person who trusted him most. He falsified documents that made it appear James had been embezzling funds, then reported James to authorities. James was arrested at his home in front of his wife and children. The betrayal worked exactly as Marcus planned. James was removed from the company and faced criminal charges that would eventually be dropped when the truth came out. But by then, it was too late for both of them. While Marcus was destroying his business and personal relationships, he was also fighting a secret battle that nobody knew about. It started innocently enough in 2008 during a business trip to Las Vegas. Marcus had closed a major deal and decided to celebrate at the blackjack tables. He won $8,000 in 2 hours and felt a rush unlike anything he had experienced since his first business success. Gambling gave Marcus something that business success couldn't: immediate gratification and the illusion of control over uncertainty. When he won, he felt like a genius. When he lost, he felt like he just needed to be smarter next time. The addiction grew slowly, disguised as entertainment and business networking. Marcus started taking monthly trips to Atlantic City, telling Elena he was visiting potential clients. He joined private poker games in Manhattan, where tech executives gathered to play for stakes that would shock most people. He convinced himself this was networking, that the connections he made at these games were worth the money he sometimes lost. But like all addictions, gambling demanded more to achieve the same high. Marcus moved from $1,000 hands to $10,000 hands. He started betting on sports, convinced his business intelligence gave him an edge in predicting outcomes. He opened accounts with multiple offshore betting sites, each one representing a secret compartment in his increasingly chaotic life. The worst part wasn't the money he lost gambling, it was the money he borrowed to continue gambling. Marcus started taking cash advances on company credit cards, borrowing from business lines of credit for personal use, and eventually stealing directly from client accounts to fund his addiction. Elena had no idea her husband was gambling away their future. She thought the late nights and weekend business trips were signs of his dedication to growing their wealth. She praised him for working so hard while he was actually sitting in casinos, betting money they didn't have on outcomes he couldn't control. By 2012, Marcus had lost over $2 million gambling, but the psychological addiction was so strong that he convinced himself one big win would solve all his problems. This delusion would drive the catastrophic decision that destroyed everything. March 2015 was supposed to be the month that changed everything for Marcus Thompson. Innovatech Solutions had been selected as the primary technology consultant for a massive government contract worth $25 million over 3 years. It was the kind of deal that would legitimize his company as a major player and provide the cash flow he desperately needed to cover his mounting debts. But there was a problem Marcus hadn't anticipated. The government contract required a comprehensive financial audit of Innovatech Solutions before final approval. The audit would uncover everything: the embezzled funds, the falsified financial statements, the money borrowed against company assets, and the elaborate shell game Marcus had been playing to keep his house of cards standing. Marcus had exactly 10 days before the audit began. He calculated that he needed $10 million to cover all the missing money and make his books appear legitimate. In his desperation, he saw only one solution that seemed viable. He would take the $10 million that investors had recently provided for company expansion and bet it all on what he considered a sure thing. Marcus had inside information about a major merger in the pharmaceutical industry. His wife Elena, though she didn't know it, had mentioned confidential details about her company's acquisition plans during casual dinner conversation. Marcus convinced himself that betting everything on this merger wasn't gambling. It was using insider information to solve his problems. He liquidated the entire $10 million investment fund and placed it all on a single financial bet. In his mind, he would double the money in 2 weeks, replace what he had stolen, pass the audit, secure the government contract, and finally have breathing room to fix his life. The merger fell through due to regulatory concerns that nobody had anticipated. In one day, Marcus lost all $10 million of investor money, but instead of confessing and facing the consequences, he made an even more catastrophic decision. He decided to liquidate everything: company assets, real estate, equipment, intellectual property, and disappear before anyone discovered what he had done. Within 24 hours, Marcus Thompson went from successful CEO to fugitive, taking what remained of company funds and leaving behind a trail of destruction that would affect hundreds of people for years to come. The evening of March 16th was the last time Marcus Thompson would sleep in his own bed for the next 2 years. He returned to his Westchester County mansion, knowing it would be the last time he walked through those doors as anything other than a criminal. Elena was in the kitchen preparing dinner, humming softly while she cooked his favorite meal, the same meal she had made for their first anniversary. Marcus watched his wife from the doorway, knowing that in a few hours she would learn that everything about their life together had been built on lies. Elena looked up and smiled, that same trusting smile that had made him fall in love with her 12 years earlier. She asked about his day, and Marcus lied one final time, telling her everything was fine. During dinner, Eleanor talked about their upcoming vacation to Italy, the renovations she wanted to make to their home office, and her hopes of finally starting the family they had been planning. Marcus nodded and smiled while his heart broke, knowing that none of these dreams would ever come true. After Elena fell asleep, Marcus packed a single suitcase with clothes and the cash he had withdrawn from their personal accounts, about $30,000 that represented all that remained of their life together. He wrote a letter that he rewrote 6 times, trying to explain the unexplainable to the woman who had loved him unconditionally. The letter was pathetic and inadequate, full of excuses and justifications that even Marcus didn't believe. He apologized for betraying her trust, but couldn't bring himself to reveal the full extent of his deception. He told her he had made bad business decisions, but didn't mention the gambling, the embezzlement, or the fact that federal agents would soon be investigating everything he had touched. Marcus left the letter on his pillow and walked out of his home at 3 a.m., knowing that Elena would wake up to discover that her husband, her marriage, and her entire life had been a carefully constructed lie. He drove away in his BMW, leaving behind everything that had ever mattered to him for the illusion of avoiding consequences that were inevitable anyway. By sunrise, news of Innovatech Solutions' collapse was spreading through the business community. By noon, Eleanor was being questioned by FBI agents. By evening, Marcus Thompson was officially a fugitive, and the woman who had loved him was left to face the destruction he had created. Marcus drove for 18 hours straight, heading south with no destination in mind except distance from his former life. When exhaustion finally forced him to stop, he found himself in a Walmart parking lot in rural Georgia, sitting in his BMW, surrounded by everything he owned in the world. 1 suitcase of clothes and $28,000 in cash that wouldn't last long. The first night sleeping in his car was the longest of his life. Every sound made him jump, thinking federal agents had found him. The BMW's leather seats that had once represented success now felt like a prison. The same hands that had signed million-dollar contracts were now shaking as he tried to eat a gas station sandwich for dinner. Marcus had never realized how many simple things he took for granted until they were gone. He couldn't use credit cards because they could be tracked. He couldn't call anyone because his phone could be traced. He couldn't go to hotels because they required identification. He was completely alone in a way that no amount of money had ever prepared him for. After a week of sleeping in parking lots and buying food from gas stations, Marcus made a decision that surprised him. He drove to a used car lot and traded his BMW for a beat-up Honda Civic and $3,000 cash. The salesman, a weathered man named Ray, asked no questions about why someone would trade a luxury car for an old sedan and cash. The Honda was 15 years old, with torn seats and a radio that barely worked, but it was anonymous in a way the BMW never could be. Marcus drove it to a public library and used their computer to research how people lived without permanent addresses. He learned about homeless shelters, day labor sites, and the invisible economy of people who had fallen through society's cracks. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus had to think about basic survival rather than profit margins. He needed to find work that paid cash and didn't require background checks. He needed places to sleep that wouldn't attract attention. He needed to learn how to be invisible in a world that had once celebrated his visibility. The most crushing realization was that all his business skills were useless in this new reality. His ability to negotiate deals meant nothing when he was counting quarters for laundry. His knowledge of market trends couldn't help him figure out which fast food restaurants threw away edible food at closing time. Marcus Thompson, the man who had built a $50 million company, was learning how to be homeless. 3 months into his life as a fugitive, Marcus was working day labor construction jobs in small towns throughout the southeast. The pay was terrible, the work was backbreaking, and his soft businessman's hands were covered in calluses and cuts. But for the first time since childhood, Marcus was earning honest money through physical labor rather than manipulation and deception. On a scorching July morning in Alabama, Marcus was working on a house renovation project when he met the person who would change his perspective on everything. Her name was Dorothy Washington, a 73-year-old woman whose house was being repaired after storm damage. Dorothy was the kind of person Marcus had never encountered in his previous life, someone who had nothing but shared everything. During their lunch break, Dorothy invited the work crew to sit on her porch and served them ice water and sandwiches she had made with her own hands. Marcus was struck by her genuine kindness toward strangers who were clearly down on their luck. When he complimented her generosity, Dorothy laughed and said something that hit him like a physical blow. "Honey, the only things worth having in this life are the things you can give away." Marcus thought about Elena, about James, about all the employees who had lost their jobs because of his selfishness. He had spent his entire adult life accumulating things he could never give away because he was too afraid of having less than enough. Dorothy had almost nothing but gave freely because she understood something Marcus was just beginning to learn. That afternoon, Dorothy asked Marcus about his life, and for some reason he couldn't explain. He found himself telling her the truth. Not the whole truth, but more honesty than he had shared with anyone in years. He told her he had made terrible mistakes that hurt people he cared about, that he was trying to figure out how to make things right. Dorothy listened without judgment, then shared her own story of loss and redemption. She had been a gambling addict who had lost her family's farm in the 60s, destroying her marriage and her relationship with her children. She spent 20 years rebuilding trust, making amends, and learning that real wealth had nothing to do with money. When the work crew finished the project and prepared to leave, Dorothy pulled Marcus aside and gave him a worn Bible with a note tucked inside. The note said, "Marcus, running away from consequences doesn't make them disappear. It just makes them heavier to carry. When you're ready to put down that weight, you'll know what to do. 6 months after meeting Dorothy, Marcus was working night shift as a janitor at a community college in North Carolina. It was honest work that paid minimum wage and required no background checks. But it was also a daily assault on the ego he had spent decades building. Every night, he cleaned classrooms where professors taught students about business ethics and success principles that he had violated in every possible way. The work was humbling in ways Marcus hadn't expected. He emptied trash cans filled with the careless waste of people who had never worried about money. He mopped floors that would be dirty again the next day. He cleaned bathrooms where students complained about tuition costs that were less than Marcus used to spend on a single business dinner. Other janitors were kind to Marcus, but they could sense he was different. His vocabulary, his mannerisms, and his obvious discomfort with manual labor marked him as someone who had fallen from a higher place. They called him college because he seemed to know too much about the business world for someone pushing a mop cart. The night shift supervisor was a man named Carlos, who had been cleaning buildings for 30 years after immigrating from El Salvador. Carlos took pride in his work that Marcus initially couldn't understand. How could someone be proud of cleaning up other people's messes? But over time, Marcus began to see that Carlos understood something about dignity that Marcus had never learned. Carlos showed Marcus that there was honor in any honest work, that self-respect came from doing your best, regardless of whether anyone noticed or thanked you. He demonstrated that a person's worth wasn't determined by their job title or bank balance, but by how they treated others and whether they could sleep peacefully at night. The most difficult part of janitorial work wasn't the physical labor or the low pay. It was becoming invisible to people who had once sought his attention and approval. Students walked past him as if he didn't exist. Professors who might have once valued his business opinion now saw only a middle-aged janitor who emptied their trash. Marcus realized this invisibility was exactly what he needed. For the first time in his adult life, he could observe human behavior without being the center of attention. He watched students stress about exams and relationships, professors struggle with budgets and politics, administrators make decisions that affected thousands of people. He began to understand that everyone was fighting battles he knew nothing about. The community college where Marcus worked had a daycare center for students with children. During his night shift, Marcus often saw evidence of the small lives that filled those classrooms during the day: finger paintings on windows, toys forgotten under desks, small chairs arranged in circles where children learned about sharing and kindness. One evening, Marcus was cleaning the daycare center when he discovered a little girl hiding behind a bookshelf. Her name was Amy, and she was 8 years old. Her mother was a nursing student who sometimes had to bring Amy to evening study sessions when babysitting arrangements fell through. Amy was supposed to be doing homework in the library, but she had wandered into the daycare center and fallen asleep. Marcus woke Amy gently and asked if she needed help finding her mother. Instead of answering, Amy looked at him with the directness that only children possess and asked, "Are you sad? You look like you're carrying something heavy." The question caught Marcus completely off guard. Children see things adults learn to ignore. Amy's mother arrived a few minutes later, apologizing profusely for her daughter's intrusion. Marcus assured her it was no problem and watched as this young mother gathered her books, her daughter, and her hopes for a better life. Something about their interaction stayed with Marcus for days. The following week, Amy appeared again during Marcus's shift. This time, she had a picture she had drawn, a stick-figure man standing under a rainbow with the words, "It gets better," written in crayon. She handed it to Marcus and said, "My mom says when we're having hard times, we should remember that storms don't last forever." Amy became Marcus's unofficial night shift companion. Her mother, Sarah, was working toward her nursing degree while raising Amy alone after her husband died in a car accident. Sarah worked 2 part-time jobs in addition to her studies, yet she always took time to thank Marcus for being kind to her daughter. Amy taught Marcus things about resilience that no business school had ever covered. She showed him how to find joy in small moments, how to be curious about the world despite disappointment, and how to trust people even when life had given her reasons not to. Amy had experienced loss that would crush many adults, yet she approached each day with optimism that amazed Marcus. Through Amy, Marcus began to understand that the most valuable lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. This 8-year-old girl who had lost her father was teaching a fugitive millionaire how to find hope again. After 18 months of running from his past, Marcus made a decision that terrified him more than losing his fortune had. He decided to stop running and start facing the consequences of his actions. The catalyst was a conversation with Amy about her school project on heroes and villains. Amy asked Marcus what makes someone a hero, and when he gave her the expected answer about helping people, she asked a follow-up question that stopped him cold. What if someone did bad things but then tried to make them better? Are they still a villain? Marcus realized this 8-year-old was asking the question that had been haunting him for months. Marcus began researching what had happened after his disappearance. Elena had divorced him in absentia and was slowly rebuilding her life. James had been cleared of all charges, but had lost his house and his reputation in the process. More than 300 former employees had lost their jobs, some losing their homes and health insurance in the process. The weight of this destruction was crushing, but Marcus realized that continuing to hide only made the damage worse. People deserved answers, even if those answers came with consequences he wasn't ready to face. More importantly, he was learning that running from problems doesn't solve them, it just spreads the pain to more people. Marcus made his first step toward redemption by doing something he should have done 2 years earlier. He told the truth. He wrote detailed letters to Elena, to James, and to the FBI, confessing everything he had done and accepting full responsibility for the consequences. He included information about offshore accounts and hidden assets that could be recovered to help compensate victims. The letters were the hardest things Marcus had ever written. Each word was an admission of betrayal, selfishness, and the damage his choices had caused to people who trusted him. But as he sealed each envelope, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Relief. The exhausting burden of maintaining lies was finally being lifted from his shoulders. Marcus drove to Atlanta and mailed the letters from a post office, knowing that within days his location would be known to federal investigators. For the first time since his escape, he slept peacefully that night. Not because his problems were solved, but because he had finally stopped making them worse. The week after mailing his confession letters, Marcus continued working his janitor job while waiting for federal agents to arrest him. Instead of fear, he felt an odd sense of anticipation. After 2 years of running, he was ready to face whatever came next. But the lessons he had learned during his time at the bottom would prove more valuable than any success he had achieved at the top. Marcus realized that his greatest failure hadn't been losing money or destroying his business. It had been losing sight of what actually mattered. The pursuit of wealth and status had consumed him so completely that he had forgotten why those things were supposed to be important in the first place. Money was meant to provide security and enable generosity, not to serve as a measure of personal worth. Working alongside people like Carlos and Dorothy and Amy's mother Sarah had shown Marcus what real strength looked like. These people faced genuine hardships every day, but maintained their integrity, treated others with kindness, and found meaning in simple things. They possessed wealth that couldn't be measured in dollars, the wealth of character, community, and purpose. Marcus began to understand that his childhood trauma had created a hole inside him that no amount of money could fill. He had tried to purchase self-worth, respect, and love, but those things can't be bought. They have to be earned through authentic relationships and genuine contribution to others' lives. The most painful realization was that he had possessed everything he truly needed: Elena's love, James's friendship, the respect of his employees. But he had destroyed it all chasing things that ultimately didn't matter. Success without integrity is just elaborate failure disguised as achievement. Marcus started keeping a journal during his final weeks of freedom, writing down every lesson he had learned through loss. He wrote about the difference between being wealthy and being rich, about the cost of lies and the value of truth, about how helping others was the only thing that gave life real meaning. These insights weren't theoretical anymore. They were lessons purchased with the currency of genuine suffering and reflection. Marcus had paid the highest possible price for his education, but he was finally learning things that could actually make him a better person rather than just a more successful one. 3 weeks after sending his confession letters, Marcus was arrested at the community college where he worked. The FBI agents were professional and respectful, acknowledging his cooperation and the detailed information he had provided to help recover stolen funds. Marcus surrendered peacefully, and for the first time in years felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. During his 18 months in federal prison, Marcus had time to develop the ideas that had been forming during his time as a fugitive. He realized that his real talent wasn't for making money. It was for understanding systems and solving complex problems. But instead of using these skills for personal gain, he wanted to use them to help people who were facing the kind of desperation that had driven his own terrible decisions. Marcus began corresponding with Dorothy, who had become an unexpected mentor and friend. She connected him with other people working in addiction recovery, financial counseling, and re-entry programs for former prisoners. Through these connections, Marcus started developing a plan for what he would do after his release. The plan wasn't about rebuilding his fortune or restoring his former status. Instead, Marcus wanted to create a non-profit organization that would help people recover from financial disasters, addiction problems, and the kind of desperation that leads to destructive choices. He would use his business skills and his hard-earned understanding of rock bottom to help others avoid the mistakes he had made. Marcus spent his prison time studying non-profit management, addiction counseling, and financial recovery strategies. He earned certifications in debt counseling and addiction support. He read everything he could find about restorative justice and how people rebuild their lives after losing everything. More importantly, Marcus began building relationships based on honesty rather than manipulation. He told fellow inmates the truth about his story, and many of them shared their own experiences of how desperation had led to destructive choices. Marcus learned that his story wasn't unique. It was a common pattern of how good people make terrible decisions when fear and shame override their better judgment. When Marcus was released after serving his sentence, he had no money, no home, and no traditional assets. But he had something more valuable: a clear sense of purpose, genuine relationships built on truth, and hard-earned wisdom about what actually matters in life. 5 years after his release from prison, Marcus Thompson lives in a small apartment in Chicago and earns $42,000 annually as director of Second Chance Financial Recovery, the non-profit organization he founded to help people rebuild their lives after financial disasters. His apartment is furnished with second-hand furniture. He drives a used Toyota, and he has less money in his bank account than he used to spend on a single business lunch. Marcus has never been happier. Second Chance has helped over 1,500 people navigate bankruptcy, addiction recovery, and the complex process of rebuilding their lives after losing everything. The organization provides financial counseling, addiction support, job placement assistance, and most importantly, hope to people who have reached rock bottom. Marcus's approach is unique because he understands the psychology of financial self-destruction from personal experience. He can spot the warning signs of gambling addiction, recognize the rationalizations that lead to embezzlement, and help people understand the difference between shame and guilt in ways that traditional counselors often can't. The most rewarding part of Marcus's work isn't helping people manage money. It's helping them rediscover their own worth, independent of their financial status. He teaches classes on what he calls authentic wealth, the kind of riches that come from meaningful relationships, honest work, and contribution to something larger than yourself. Marcus has reconnected with some of the people his actions hurt years earlier. Elena remarried and has the family she always wanted, but she and Marcus have found a way to be civil and even friendly. James eventually started his own consulting firm and has hired several former Innovatech employees. While their friendship will never fully recover, James respects the work Marcus is doing now and the genuine changes he has made. Amy, the 8-year-old girl who taught Marcus about resilience, is now 13 and writes him letters about her school achievements. Her mother, Sarah, became a registered nurse and sometimes volunteers at second chance events. Amy still draws pictures for Marcus, but now they show people helping each other rather than just rainbows and hope. Marcus measures success differently now. Instead of counting profits, he counts the number of people who have avoided bankruptcy through second chances counseling. Instead of tracking stock prices, he tracks recovery milestones of people overcoming addiction. Instead of building wealth, he builds relationships based on honesty and mutual support. The most profound change is that Marcus no longer fears poverty the way he did as a child. He has been truly poor as an adult and discovered that his worth as a person had nothing to do with his bank balance. This freedom from financial fear allows him to make decisions based on what's right rather than what's profitable. Marcus Thompson's story challenges everything our culture teaches about success and failure. He had to lose $50 million to discover what real wealth actually meant. He had to become homeless to understand what home really was. He had to face the consequences of his actions to learn the difference between being smart and being wise. The most remarkable part of Marcus's transformation isn't that he survived losing everything. It's that he used that experience to help others avoid the same mistakes. His greatest failure became his most valuable asset, not because it taught him how to make money, but because it taught him how to make meaning. Marcus often tells people at Second Chance that rock bottom is an excellent foundation for rebuilding your life, but only if you're honest about how you got there and committed to building something different on top of it. Success isn't about avoiding failure, it's about what you do with failure when it inevitably comes. Today, Marcus Thompson is genuinely wealthy in ways that can't be measured by traditional metrics. He has work that matters, relationships built on truth, and the peace that comes from living with integrity. He learned that the most valuable things in life are indeed the things you can give away, just like Dorothy taught him all those years ago. What do you think about Marcus's journey from millionaire to janitor to someone who found real meaning in helping others? Have you ever experienced a failure that later became a valuable lesson? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story inspired you, please consider subscribing to our channel for more incredible stories of transformation and resilience. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest content, and give this video a thumbs up if Marcus's story touched your heart.